Affable. Marked by simplicity and friendliness, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. You can check it out if you'd like, and when you do, don't be shocked to see my face smiling back at you. Need assistance moving your couch? I have a truck, just give me a shout. Need a partner for a double date? I dress decently and can chat casually with just about everyone. Stranded at the bar and need a lift home? I've got your back, but please don't throw up on the seats. I accepted long ago that I am not the protagonist in the story of life. I'm the person you encounter on a side quest, the one who makes you laugh and progresses the narrative while throwing out some bad jokes and awkward dance moves. You won't regret hanging out with me for a while, but in the end you'll move on with the rest of your journey, and I will remain just a pleasant memory. And that's fine. Or at least it was for the first 29 years of my existence until I met Jason and Jen. I was born and raised just outside a small town in the northeastern corner of Georgia. My parents had me rather late in life. They had always dreamed of a big family but had been unable to conceive and were too poor to try any of the expensive treatments for infertility that were just becoming popular in the early 80s. I was their miracle child, and I was deeply cherished. My dad was a mechanic and a fantastic one at that. He ran his own garage with 3 bays and 2 gas pumps out front. He was fair and decent and treated everyone with warmth and respect. He never charged more than his customers could afford, and in our neighborhood, people couldn't afford much. But they repaid his generosity the best way they could, and that was enough. Every winter, our freezer was packed with venison from local hunters whose mufflers wouldn't make it through to spring. When our roof needed fixing, Frank and his crew did the work for free and took twice as long as they might have, pausing every hour or two for a fresh lemonade or a homemade sandwich prepared by my mom. My mother was a homemaker, caring for me and keeping up with the endless upkeep and tasks that are part of life on a rural property. When things got hectic, she would come and assist in the shop, bringing me along, at first to play with my toy cars on the floor of the office and then, as I got older, to help the mechanics by doing small jobs and generally learning the craft. By the time I was in my teens, I was working evenings and weekends with my dad in the garage and pumping gas. My dad adored his customers and treated them all like part of an enormous extended family. Every patron who stopped by had their windows wiped and their oil inspected, regardless of how much fuel they bought. People who arrived as clients left as companions. My most treasured childhood memories are all from that garage. The scent of gas and grease, the mix of laughter and grumbling as the men worked, and my dad at the center of it all, always ready with a grin or a helping hand. Outside of my dad's shop, I did well enough in school and had aspirations of going to state for engineering and earning a spot on the football team as a walk-on. My coaches told me that I had a natural talent for catching passes and that I could probably earn a football scholarship if I just put in the effort. I respected my coaches and appreciated my teammates, but I enjoyed spending time with my friends or working with my dad more than I did running endless drills and lifting weights. At one point, my dad even set up a gym behind the shop to motivate me to train, but I just preferred to hang out with him under a car instead. When I was about 12, my dad came home one day brimming with excitement. His warm smile stretched across his weathered face. He told my mom and me that he had a surprise, and he couldn't wait to show it to us. So, after dinner, we all piled into his truck and headed down to the shop. When we arrived, he eagerly showed us what could best be described as a mangled pile of rusted metal. If you looked closely, I suppose you could tell that the pile had once been a car, but it had been in a terrible accident and now looked more like a piece of modern art than a vehicle. Well, what do you think? It's really something, Dad, really something, I replied. Honestly, I couldn't have told you the make or model of the car that this heap of metal had been in its previous life. Honestly, I could barely have told you what color it was except for the cherry red paint that peeked through on a couple of pieces of the twisted steel. This is a 1967 Shelby Mustang GT 500, my dad explained in an almost reverent tone. Only 2,000 were produced, and it's the most stunning car that was ever built. Maybe it was before the crash, I joked. Now it's more like an oversized paperweight or a cautionary tale about the hazards of driving too fast in a sports car. My dad thought for a moment and then replied, "Son, true beauty is rare. Anyone with enough money can go and buy a flawless Shelby at auction. Don't get me wrong, that car is still striking, but it is a shallow kind of beauty. That beauty is purchased, not earned, It takes time and patience to look at a wreck like this and see both the beauty that it once was and, with perseverance, care, and a little luck, could be again. But Dad, you could work for years to restore this thing only to find out that it is damaged beyond repair. Aren't you worried you'll waste your time and have nothing to show for it? Very little is ever damaged beyond repair, my dad said with his gentle smile. Maybe it is damaged beyond the effort you're willing to put in to fix it. Maybe it will never return to the same beauty that it had before it was broken. Or maybe, just maybe, we can uncover a new kind of beauty in it. One that is distinctive. He paused for a moment before looking at me and asking, "What do you say? Are you willing to do the work?" He didn't need to ask. From that day forward, Shelby became a cornerstone of my life. It took us over 3 months just to evaluate the damage. By some miracle, the frame was mostly intact, but nearly everything else was bent, warped, rusted, or ruined. It took us almost a year to fully dismantle it, document the issues, and create a restoration plan. It took 3 more years of weekends and evenings to strip the body and source replacements for the original components that were destroyed in the crash. By my senior year of high school, though, the most difficult restoration work was done, and we were on the final stretch. My life shifted late in the spring of my senior year of high school. I stopped by the shop on my way home from school early, on a Thursday evening. I remember thinking that the sky was a stunning canvas of reds and oranges, and I half expected to see Dad outside the shop appreciating the sunset. Regardless of how busy he was, my dad would always pause to watch the sky burst into color before fading into darkness, saying, "If God took the time to paint the sky like that for us, it would be a shame not to stop and enjoy it." I found him collapsed beneath one of the hoists. The doctor said that the massive heart attack likely took his life before he hit the ground. At least he didn't endure pain, and his last day was spent doing the thing that he loved. We laid him to rest on the first day of June in the cemetery beside the church, just off the old highway. My mom managed the shop as best she could, but she struggled. I suppose she could have sold it, but she never truly considered that as an alternative. Our employees were like family, and they grieved for my father alongside my mom. Mom tried to persuade me to stay in school and to pursue my education like I had planned, but I knew that path had closed for me the day that he passed. I started working full-time in the shop after I graduated. Within a year, I earned my credentials and took over running the day-to-day from my mom. By then, it was obvious that we couldn't keep the garage afloat and maintain the acreage, so my mom sold the house and the land where I grew up and moved into a small apartment in town. Between my father's life insurance and the money from the sale, she had just enough to retire, and so she did. I got my own apartment close to the shop, and life continued. I worked long hours, dated a little, and checked in on my mom. In my downtime, I gamed or spent time with my friends. My sedentary lifestyle and questionable eating habits led to a gradual decline in my fitness. The lean and athletic build I maintained throughout high school transitioned to what could charitably be described as a dad bod, or bachelor bod if you prefer. And that was my life. Saturday, January 3rd, 2014. How much gaming is excessive? It was an important scientific query, and one that I was determined to answer come hell or high water. The shop was unusually quiet during the Christmas holidays, so I had taken a few days off to unwind and play far more Call of Duty than was advisable. I had made a critical mistake in my planning, however, and misjudged the quantity of snacks that I would consume during my gaming binge, so just before noon, I pulled on my track pants, found a fresh pair of socks, and set off to the store to restock. The apartment complex I lived in was typical for my area, a 2-story concrete rectangle with a central staircase, 2 apartments on either side of the stairs, 4 per floor and 8 in total. The apartments at the front of the building had 1 larger bedroom, while those at the back had 2 smaller ones. Other than that, they were identical. They were not luxurious. As I left my apartment, I noticed that the door of the 2-bedroom unit across the way was propped open by a moving box. I wasn't surprised, as the previous tenants had left rather abruptly more than a month ago. They were a young couple who seemed to argue and make love with equal intensity. Over time, the arguments appeared to dominate until the police were called one too many times, and their lease was terminated abruptly. As I started down the stairs, I saw a boy in his early teens heading up with a box of kitchen utensils. He was tall and lean, his body all bones and awkward angles. As often happens with boys that age, He had a mop of sandy blonde hair and kept his eyes down as he ascended the stairs. "Morning," I said with a friendly grin. He didn't respond and kept moving. As I made my way towards the parking lot, I saw what I assumed to be his mother, unloading an older model Honda with a small rental trailer full of boxes and furniture. "Hey there," I said as I walked up. "You must be my new neighbor. I'm JT." The woman looked up at me, and I was struck by two things simultaneously. First, she appeared worn out, the kind of fatigue that comes from living with years of stress and anxiety. The kind that burrows into your bones and leaks out when you perspire. The kind that dulls your ambitions and drains the happiness from your life. Second, she was stunning. Not pretty, not cute, not even attractive. She was stunning. I would have called her the woman of my dreams, but that would have been untrue. I wasn't imaginative enough to conjure someone with eyes that big and piercingly blue, hair that blonde, cheeks that soft, though slightly flushed with exertion, lips that full. Well, you get the idea. And the hints of her form beneath her oversized moving clothes were enough to make my heart race. She was undoubtedly the most breathtaking woman I had ever encountered, and I felt my breath catch in my chest as she made eye contact with me without saying a word. After an awkward pause, I said, "Here, let me help you with those," as I picked up a box from the trailer and started up the stairs. As I helped her with her boxes, a third thing became evident. Jen, her name as I eventually learned, was almost humorously out of my league. I think I have a fairly realistic sense of who I am and what I can offer the world. I meet 2 of the 3 criteria of the 666 rule, the only exception being that I was never going to make a 6-figure income, at least not with the way I ran the shop. With enough leftover muscle from my football playing days to still be considered attractive, at least in the right light. Women like Jen, however, simply weren't interested in 29-year-old mechanics no matter how charismatic we might be. Regardless, I was now regretting my decision not to change into a clean set of clothes before leaving the house. My day-old gaming sweatpants and t-shirt were probably not the best choice for making a favorable first impression. But frankly, I could have been wearing a tailored suit and a top hat, and she still would have been way out of my league, so I wasn't too concerned. I couldn't help but notice that Jen wasn't wearing a wedding ring, and there didn't seem to be any sign of a partner's belongings among the boxes and furniture. Perfect. She was destined to be mine, I told myself sarcastically, as I brought her last box up the stairs. All I needed was to lose 30 pounds, upgrade my wardrobe and living situation, get a college degree, and secure a better-paying job. Oh, and convince Jen to fall for me. I spotted a PS3 in one of the moving boxes and mentioned to Jen's son Jason that I had just bought the new PS4 and invited him to come over and play if he wanted. This seemed to crack his quiet exterior, and he said with a hint of eagerness that he might drop by later. When we finished, I wished Jen and Jason a good day and headed to the store to restock my gaming supplies. In the snack aisle, I took a quick glance at my stomach and, for a moment, thought about skipping the bag of Doritos I had planned to buy in favor of something healthier. The thought passed, however, and I grabbed a large bag of Doritos and a Coke, heading home. Maybe dating beautiful women was beyond reach for someone like me, but beautiful snacks were not. Later that evening, I was surprised to hear a knock on the door. It turned out that the appeal of the PS4 was stronger than Jason's social awkwardness, so I invited him in to play. It also turned out that he was pretty good at Call of Duty, but I still kicked his butt. Wouldn't want him to think I'd go easy on him just because he was younger. What I thought would be a one-time visit to the game soon turned into a regular event. When I got home from work or on the weekends, Jason would stop by to see if I was available to play. Sunday mornings, Jen would take him to church, but once they got back, it was straight to gaming. Occasionally, Jen would stop by to make sure that Jason wasn't being too much of a bother, but I didn't see her all that often. She seemed to have her own concerns, and the last thing I wanted to do was add to them. I liked Jason, though, and enjoyed our comfortable silence as we played. Here's your revised text with synonyms replaced and adjusted language as requested. Sunday, January 19th, 2014. The day of the conference championships had arrived. Playoff football was a significant event for my friends and me. Not as major as college game days in the fall, but big enough to justify a gathering and the inevitable teasing that followed. I invited my closest friends Ted and Sue over to watch the games with me while lounging on my inexpensive sofa and watching my overly large and notably expensive TV. Ted and Sue were, at first glance, an odd couple. Ted was a literal giant of a man, standing well over 6'5" and weighing more than 300 pounds. He was the starting left tackle on my high school football team and a crucial part of our success. Unfortunately, Ted discovered in college that he had the back of a much smaller and lighter person, so after several painful surgeries, he gave up on his aspirations of playing professionally. He did, however, earn a degree before moving home to become the largest accountant in the entire state of Georgia. He was also a kind, considerate, and generous friend. In contrast, his wife Sue was a delicate woman, barely 5 feet tall and weighing less than Ted's left leg. I had been in a relationship with Sue for 2 years into my senior year of high school. To be completely honest, she was my first and so far only love. Unfortunately, although Sue loved and loves me deeply, it was never romantic love, more like the affection one feels for a younger sibling. It also became painfully obvious to me, and to everyone else with functional eyes, that Ted and Sue were deeply in love with each other, and that my connection with Sue was the only thing keeping them apart. They both cared for me too much to act on what they felt, but their sadness at being apart was tangible. They never did anything inappropriate or said anything direct, and when we hung out together, they stayed as far apart as they could, trying not to even make eye contact. Despite their best intentions, their feelings for each other couldn't help but slip through the cracks. This love triangle continued for a few months until I couldn't tolerate it any longer. I broke up with Sue and called Ted while crying my heart out, telling him to ask her out, or I would come over and kick his big butt. If she wasn't going to be mine, she better be his. The next few months were difficult for me. I was happy for Ted and Sue, but a mix of envy and isolation gnawed at me, making it impossible to be around them and share in their happiness. We stopped hanging out completely, and I spent all my free time at the shop, working on the Shelby, which was nearly finished. We might have permanently drifted apart, if not for my father's passing. The moment they heard what had happened to my dad, they drove out to the property and didn't leave my side until after the funeral. They were my support, my pillars of stability and love in a sea of sorrow. We have been inseparable ever since. Sue had done her best over the years to find me someone who would care for me the way that I cared for her. She was an unexpectedly skilled matchmaker, and many nights out at the local bar ended with her convincing a lovely young woman to take a chance on me. No one ever replaced her in my heart, though, and for the longest time, I thought that no one ever would. I had made my peace with it. The two best people I knew loved me deeply. They just loved each other more. Partway through the first game, I heard a knock on the door. Jason was wondering if we could play together, but I explained to him about the importance of the playoffs and invited him in to watch with us instead. I introduced him to Ted and Sue and grabbed him a soda from the kitchen. Sue looked over at Jason and asked, "So are you a big football fan?" Jason closed his eyes and visibly slumped. "Not really," he said. "My dad was a quarterback in high school and dreamed that I would follow in his footsteps. He never really forgave me for being awful at it. In fact, that's why he left my mom." "I'm sure that wasn't the reason," Sue said with a gentle smile, feeling awful for unintentionally bringing up such a painful topic. "Well, the night he left," Jason continued, "he yelled at my mom, calling her a cheating liar, because any son of his would be great at football, not an uncoordinated idiot. Then he took the car and our savings and left." "Man, that's tough," Ted said, shaking his head in sympathy. With a quirk of a smile, he continued, "Well, sorry to say it, but your dad sounds like a jerk, but football is awesome. Hang out and watch the games with us for a while and you'll see." Sue just shook her head and went back to her book. Jason stayed, and as the game progressed, he became more and more focused on the screen. He started asking questions about players and positions. Why does this player move across the formation before the play? How does that player know who to block? What is the quarterback saying before each play, and what does it mean? For a kid who knew very little about football, he asked some good questions. Finally, towards the end of the fourth quarter, he asked, "Why did the quarterback throw to that receiver?" The receiver on the other side of the field was about to come open over the middle. "Well, he probably didn't see that receiver coming open or didn't think he would have time to throw to them and went with his other option instead," I replied. "It was the wrong choice," Jason said with conviction. "I guess you need to get out there and tell him that then," Ted said with a wink and a laugh. I would, but no one will play with me, Jason replied. I'm not any good. You're not any good yet, said Sue, jumping into the conversation. Being good at football isn't some intrinsic part of who you are. Sure, some people can run faster or jump higher, or have other traits that make football easier for them. If you practice, though, you can get better at pretty much anything. Who knows how good you could be with enough time and patience? In fact, JT used to play football in high school, and I am sure he could train you, right, JT? I looked at Sue, who sat smirking in her chair. I looked at Ted, who quirked his shoulders in the universal sign for, I have heard worse ideas, or maybe it was the sign for, never disagree with my wife if you want continued happiness in your life. I looked at Jason, who sat on the couch avoiding my gaze. Sighing inside, I asked him, What do you think, buddy? Do you want to learn to play football? I asked, hoping against hope that he would say no. Sure, that would be great, he said. When do we start? Tomorrow morning, 6:30 a.m. before you head to school. We are going to start with running until you puke, and then, if you still want to learn, we can take things from there. Monday, January 20th, 2014. My alarm went off at 6:25 a.m. What the heck was I thinking suggesting a morning run? I hated running. I hated running when I played football. I hated running when I quit playing football. Heck, most of the time I found walking to be barely tolerable. I wasn't the biggest fan of mornings either. I decided to lay in bed pretending that I hadn't agreed to this madness while under the influence of football and drinks. I heard a faint knock on the door. Dang. Coming, I croaked in my semi-hungover state while I pulled on a pair of joggers and a t-shirt. I didn't own a pair of running shoes, so I put on the closest facsimile that I had and went to the door. Jason stood there in a pair of ratty old shorts, a t-shirt that was a couple of sizes too large, and a pair of trainers from a discount retailer that barely fit his feet. Jen was a good mom, maybe even a great mom given her circumstances, but money was tight for her and Jason. I didn't know exactly how tight at the time, but I knew that things weren't good, and clearly the funds didn't extend to new athletic gear. Okay, let's do this thing, I said to him with far more enthusiasm than I felt. We walked down the stairs to the parking lot, and I led Jason through an abbreviated warm-up. It was tough to say which of the two of us was less flexible, but it was close either way. After some painful stretching, we set out. I had ambitions to do a few miles that first day, maybe mix in some up-tempo sprints with some jogging. It turns out, however, that a decade is a long time to take off between workouts. Our run quickly devolved into a couple minutes of jogging, followed by a minute of walking while desperately winded. At least no one was watching, I thought to myself as the preacher's car drove by with a friendly honk and a wave from his grinning kids. Great, just great. We made it home, barely, in just over half an hour, driven mainly by pride and an unwillingness to quit before the other did. Well, that was fun, I said with more than a hint of sarcasm. You did great, buddy. I said I would run you till you puked, and you made it all the way with your breakfast intact. I'm proud of you, and we'll see you at the same time tomorrow morning if you'd like. Jason enthusiastically agreed, and went up to his apartment while I went home to mine, closed and locked the door, and then walked over to the sink and vomited. What had I gotten myself into? Saturday, February 15th, 2014. It's amazing how quickly old skills can come back to you with a bit of dedication and an annoyingly punctual teenager knocking on your door every morning. After that first run, I managed to keep my breakfast from making any more unwanted reappearances. Jason showed real persistence in his training, if not a lot of raw coordination or foot speed. After the first week of jogging, I started adding in some bodyweight exercises to our morning routine with push-ups, sit-ups, and squats, adding a nice frisson of muscular agony to the already exciting morning menu of running and stretching. But again, Jason took it all in stride and did his best to keep up. Never once did he complain or ask me to go easy on him. Despite my gruff demeanor, I had to admit that it was kind of fun working out again and seeing Jason learn. I loved how hard he pushed himself. I also loved the smiles I would get from his mom as she left for work in the mornings while we worked out. One smile from Jen could last me through a full day at the shop. That Saturday morning, I decided that I would buy a new football and some equipment for our training. I thought I would also look at some new footwear for myself and for Jason. Although he did his best to hide it, it was clear that it was not comfortable for him to run in shoes that were at least a full size too small. I knew Jen couldn't afford new ones for Jason, but I figured getting him some trainers that fit was the least that I could do to support his newfound love of football. It would also be my way of saying thank you to him for getting me up off the couch and working out again. My back and knees felt better than they had in years, and I even noticed that a couple of pairs of my shorts were getting baggy at the waist where they had been overly snug for at least the past half-decade. Yes, I don't go clothes shopping very often, so sue me. I was down the stairs and most of the way to my truck before I spotted Jen standing dejectedly in front of her car. The hood was up, and she was staring at the engine. As a mechanic, I had seen that pose many times. Roughly translated, it meant, I hope this isn't going to be too expensive to fix. I also noted in passing that she was wearing jeans that seemed to have been painted onto her legs and her magnificent behind. The slight bend in her waist as she leaned forward accentuated her otherworldly butt, and the lack of visible panty lines suggested that she was sporting a thong or less under that masterwork of fabric engineering. Pulling my eyes up with difficulty, I walked over to see if I could help. Hey Jen, having some car troubles? I'll admit it wasn't the smoothest line, but, in my defense, I was a bit distracted. It won't start, she replied, her voice raw with frustration and worry. Do you mind if I take a quick look? I asked. It might be a straightforward fix. If you don't mind, that would be great, she replied. I got in the driver's seat, moving it back as far as it would go, one of the hazards of being 6 feet 2 inches, and tried the key. The engine sputtered and turned over, then died. Has it been misfiring or running rough? I asked Jen as I got out of the car and came back around. Both, actually, she said, looking embarrassed. I know I should have got it looked at before now, but it's been a rough few months money-wise, so I didn't bring it in. I had planned to get it looked at as soon as I got back on top of things. Listening to the engine, I told her, I think the issue is likely with your plugs or ignition coils. I should be able to fix either for you. If it's the plugs, I am pretty sure I have a set at the garage. Let me go grab them and my tools, and we will see what we can do. Jen looked uncomfortable and looked away. That's really kind of you, JT. But I don't have the cash right now to pay for the work. Let's just leave it. Maybe I'll get lucky, and it will start later once it warms up a bit. That seemed like a very poor idea to me, but I remembered what it was like to be desperately tight on cash, like Mom and I had been after my dad passed. Hey, no charge for helping a neighbor. Maybe you can pay me back with some home-cooked meals or something. If I am going to get back in shape working out with Jason, maybe I should also improve my diet. And the smells that come out of your apartment when you're making dinner make my mouth water. It's a deal, Jen replied with a smile. I really appreciate it. Okay, give me half an hour to head to the shop and back, and then hopefully we can get you going. I can ride with you if you want some company, Jen offered. Sure, that would be fun, I replied, but you will have to excuse the mess at the shop. I have been meaning to straighten up for the last decade or so, but there always seems to be better things to do. Our conversation on the way to the shop was light and mainly revolved around Jason. I told her what a good kid he was and that he was working his butt off in our morning workouts. I was a bit surprised when Jen let out a sigh. If I share something about Jason, will you promise not to tell him I told you? She asked. Of course, I replied. Jason is a great kid, but he has had his struggles in life. He was very late walking and very late talking. My ex-husband and I were worried, so we took him to Atlanta for testing. The doctors said that he is on the autism spectrum and to expect there to be challenges as he gets older. The good news, they said, was that with some extra support he would be able to lead a perfectly normal life and even excel in areas like math and coding. But he would have a hard time understanding social cues and might find it difficult to make friends and fit in. I was so relieved to finally have a diagnosis, but my ex was enraged. He had been a star quarterback in high school but had flamed out in college. So much of his personality and self-worth was built around football. His dream was for Jason to succeed where he couldn't, so Jason's diagnosis crushed him. When Jason was still very young, my ex tried to force him to play, but he just wasn't very good. Catching and throwing were difficult, and the other kids and my ex weren't kind to him. He was always a bit different and had a hard time making friends, and his challenges with football just made things worse. My ex took Jason's struggles personally. Once he realized that Jason wouldn't follow in his footsteps, he basically checked out of our relationship. He started cheating on me with a stripper, and a few months after that, he was gone, leaving me with our son and the credit card debt he racked up wooing my replacement. I know you mean well by helping Jason, but I just worry that you are setting him up for another failure. You know he doesn't have a single friend yet at his new school? What happens if he tries out for football and things just get worse again? Well, all I have seen so far is a good kid who is working his butt off every day, I replied as we pulled into the shop. Will Jason make the team? Honestly, probably not. He is still young for the varsity team, and he is starting to play much later than most of the kids he will be trying out with. But at least he will end up in better shape, and with a bit of luck, have a chance to make some friends along the way. Now let's see about those spark plugs, I concluded, as we pulled into the lot behind the garage and parked. By the time I came around the truck to help Jen off the running board, we were greeted by George, who had come out of the office to say hi. George was an older man, dressed in plain overalls and a white t-shirt. A jagged scar stretched from just above his lip until it disappeared in his hairline. He walked over with a limp, a vague but happy expression on his face. "Hello, JT. "Hello, pretty lady," he announced with a smile. "Morning, George," I replied. "This is my friend Jen. Her car needs some new spark plugs, so I was going to see what we have in the back." "Nice to meet you, George," Jen said, extending her hand. George looked at her hand but didn't respond. "George," I said quietly. When he didn't respond, I said more firmly, "George." He looked over. "Maybe you could go and get Jen a glass of water and then check the oil in the truck?" "Okay, JT, will do." He turned and went back into the office. Turning to Jen, I explained, "George has worked here for as long as I can remember. He used to be a mechanic back when my dad still ran the shop, but he was in a terrible accident that left both that scar on his face and scars inside that are less visible. When it became clear that he would never really recover after the accident, most folks thought that he would end up in an institution of some kind. But my dad would hear nothing of that. He kept his job here doing what he could, and Dad covered the rest. George took over the gas pumps and greeting folks as they came into the garage. He is a bit of an institution in these parts. "Wow, your dad sounds like he was a great guy," Jen said thoughtfully. "He was the best," I replied. "If I am half the man that he was, I will be happy with my life." George came back with a glass of water while I retrieved the spark plugs and my tools, and we headed back to the apartment. Half an hour later, Jen's car was back up and running. "Thanks again," Jen said, giving me a quick hug. "You're literally a lifesaver. Do you want to join us for dinner Sunday night?" "What? You don't have a date on the weekend after Valentine's Day?" I asked, gently teasing her. I hoped she didn't notice my blush as she wrapped her arms around me. "I have learned the hard way that Valentine's Day is not for single mothers," Jen replied sadly. "I expect that this weekend will be just as romantic as any of the other 51 weekends in the year, which is to say not at all." "All right then, non-romantic dinner on Sunday it is," I said with a grin. "Just let me know when you want me." That Sunday, I decided that it couldn't hurt to bring some flowers for Jen on our not-a-date post-Valentine's dinner, so I stopped by the local grocers and bought an overpriced but now steeply discounted bouquet for her. This drew a headshake and long-suffering sigh from Jason, but a smile from Jen, who put the flowers in a vase on the table. Whether it was the flowers or my scintillating conversational ability, dinner was a success and led to a new tradition of the three of us having dinner together on most Sunday nights. Monday, February 20th, 2014. "All right, bud, let's see how you do with a football." We had just returned from our morning run and had half an hour before Jason left for school. It was time to start figuring out what positions he might be able to play. I started him out with some receiving drills since it was the position that I was most familiar with. Unfortunately, Jason was still not the fastest runner, although a month of training certainly helped. Catching was also a bit of an adventure for him. "Okay, let me show you what a cut should look like, and then you can try it again," I offered after a particularly problematic sequence that saw Jason both drop the ball and trip over his own feet. "Do you think you can throw me the ball?" I asked, a bit skeptically. "Sure," he replied. "Where do you want me to throw it?" "Throw it as soon as I make my break," I replied, jogging out 10 yards before I began. "You see, the trick is to start your cut with your outside foot." I didn't finish the sentence. As I left my break, Jason hit me right in the hands with a rocket of a throw, which literally spun me a half turn as I caught it. Holy cow, dude, where did that come from? Jason looked back at me a bit sheepishly. Throwing is just math. Well, math and physics, but physics is really math, so throwing is just math. If you say so, dude. Let's try that again. Let me go a little deeper. This time I broke my cutoff at 20 yards, and again he hit me in stride. Now this was promising. We kept working until he had to leave for school. By that point, we had determined that he could throw with accuracy up to at least 40 yards, or more accurately until we ran out of parking lot for me to run down as he threw to me. I guess Jason was going to be a quarterback like his dad. It came out later that after Jason's dad had left, he had done the only thing he could think of to get him to come back, get better at football. Where most kids would have looked at videos online or watched their favorite NFL star, Jason went to the library and learned everything there was to know about the physics of throwing. When he could, he would sneak into the backyard to practice what he learned. His dad never came back, but his throwing got better and better, to the point that I was genuinely impressed at what he could do. What was less impressive was pretty much everything else besides throwing that Jason would need to do to be a good quarterback. Now I know you're probably asking yourself, isn't throwing just about the only thing that a quarterback has to do? Unfortunately, that is not the case. There is footwork, decision-making, reading defenses, evading the rush, and most importantly, leadership. A team naturally looks to their quarterback to make the right decisions. A good quarterback doesn't need to be loud, doesn't need to be brash, but they need to be able to inspire their team when it counts. Right now, Jason couldn't make eye contact with anyone other than me and his mother, which would make it difficult to carry on a conversation, let alone lead a team. One more trait that a quarterback needs to have, especially one with Jason's innate speed and agility, or lack thereof, was the ability to take a hit. Quarterbacks learn to read the defense and to anticipate the rush. They learn to move around in the pocket to buy time for a play to develop or move outside of the pocket to extend a broken play. But no matter how hard they work, there will always be times when they take a hit. With his gangly limbs and painfully thin body, I worried that if Jason took a hit, he might explode into his constituent limbs and body parts. It was time for him to put on some muscle. I hadn't done any weights in more than a decade. Heck, the push-ups I was doing each morning with Jason were enough to nearly kill me. But I had never had the heart to get rid of the gym that my dad had set up for me behind his shop, so I figured that would be a good place to start. All right, Jason, you're going to play quarterback. That seems clear. We need to start putting some meat on your bones. If your mom's all right with it, why don't you come by the shop after school and I can show you how to start doing some lifting? Thanks, JT. I'll do that, replied Jason with the kind of enthusiasm that foreshadowed many painful afternoons of lifting to come. From that point on, things evolved into a natural rhythm. Jason would come by the shop after school most days, and I would set him up to do some lifting. When he wasn't lifting, he showed a real interest in the shop. He became good friends with George and would patiently help him out with his tasks or throw a football with him on slower days. I often stayed late on days Jason lifted, and he would watch me work when he was done, asking me questions. Looking back, I marvel at the patience my father showed in answering my endless questions around the shop when I was a kid because, let me tell you, it can get frustrating having someone constantly asking what this tool is for or what that button does. Unlike my younger self, however, Jason endured my occasional grumpiness with good grace, or teenage obliviousness. He was a quick study, rarely asking the same question twice, and if he did, he never asked a third time. Jason had an unusual gift for understanding how things fit together and seemed to picture even the most complicated systems in his head. Surprisingly, once my initial irritation wore off, I realized I genuinely enjoyed having him around the shop. Most nights, Jen would have dinner ready when Jason got back, and some nights, if I was lucky, she would invite me to join them. The meals weren't fancy, but wow, Jen could cook. As sacrilegious as it might sound, she was at least as good as my mom, who had always been my gold standard for culinary magic. Evenings, Jason and I would play games on the PS4 at my place or head out to the back parking lot to practice throwing. On other nights, the three of us would watch a movie together, and those nights quickly became my favorites. Seeing Jen relax with her son, laughing at a mindless comedy while her worries melted away for a moment, always brought a smile to my face. If you're wondering, Jen didn't become any less beautiful during those first months. In fact, as I got to know her better over shared meals and conversations, I discovered she was just as beautiful inside as she was outside. She was kind, thoughtful, hard-working, and stubborn as a mule. She was also whip-smart and, once you got to know her, really funny in her own way, though her sense of humor was as dry as the desert. Jen grew up in a suburb of Atlanta and lived a charmed life as a child. In high school, she was the captain of the cheerleading squad and dated the star quarterback. Her parents weren't rich, but they were solidly middle class, and she had dreams of going to college and becoming a lawyer. Things started to fall apart in her senior year. She became pregnant, and termination was never an option with her religious parents. Her boyfriend, now ex-husband, Bill, proposed to her at the end of his final high school game. Their future seemed bright until he blew out the ACL, MCL, and PCL in his right knee road racing on his motorbike, losing his football scholarship. When Jason was born, Jen and Bill were both working close to minimum wage jobs and living in her parents' basement, while Jen studied nights and weekends to become a paralegal. By the time Jason was 5, Jen was the primary earner. Bill spent his money and spare time cheating on Jen while she kept the family together. Her parents didn't believe in divorce, so they encouraged forgiveness and finding solutions within the marriage. By the time that Bill ran away with his stripper, he had run up more than $30,000 in credit card debt, all in Jen's name. Jason needed specialized support at school, and Bill would not provide any child support, so Jen did what she did best. She buckled down and did the work, and they managed to survive. She stuck it out for 5 years, paying the minimum on the credit card debt and getting Jason the support he needed to thrive. When living in the city became too expensive, she moved north to make a new start and ended up across the hall from me. Jen was a fighter, and I was here for it. With the benefit of hindsight, I was in love with her even back then, but it was clear that she didn't see me in that way, and I could understand why. Despite her hard luck, Jen was a main character, and I knew I was just part of the supporting cast. But man, did I enjoy sharing the stage with her, even if only for a little while. Early spring 2014 spring in Georgia means two things: cherry blossoms and 7-on-7 football. For those of you not familiar with the 7-on-7 game, basically it's football, but you take out the beef and leave in the sizzle. There is no tackling, so no need for the big bodies to protect or pound the quarterback. Everything is focused on the skill positions, ignoring how much skill is needed to play on the offensive or defensive lines, but I digress. The game is fast, and the scoring is quick. Jason was making great progress in his morning workouts, so I thought it was time for him to start getting some live games under his belt. There was only one problem. By the time kids in Georgia reach high school, most of them have been playing spring ball for a decade, and most 7-on-7 teams had their rosters pretty much set with returning players. There are no open tryouts, at least not for teams that are even vaguely competitive. You're either a legacy who grew up playing with the team, a star who moved into the area mid-year, or you didn't play. Jason was neither a legacy nor a star, so his prospects were bleak. After asking around a bit, however, I learned that there were a number of kids in the same boat as Jason who also didn't have a team to play on. So I did what any sane person would do in this situation. I said to myself, "That's a shame," and walked away. Or at least that's what I would have done if I was smarter. But I couldn't stand Jason's disappointment at not getting to play after training so hard. So I decided that we would build our own team from scratch. By default, I would coach, and I called up Ted and volunteered to be my assistant. He asked what I thought an old injured lineman could teach a bunch of kids about offensive football. "About the same as a lazy former wide receiver," was my reply. And that's how, on the last Saturday of March, we found ourselves on a field behind the elementary school picking a 7-on-7 football team. We had 13 teens show up to try out, 12 boys and 1 girl. The boys ranged from tiny, barely pubescent kids in oversized jerseys to a veritable mountain of a boy who was taller than me and must have outweighed me by 100 pounds or more. When I asked the mountain his name, he replied with a grin, saying, "Hernando Diego Isandro Gualtiero Jimenez III. "And what do your friends call you?" I asked. "My friends call me Sneaky." "And your family?" "They are the ones who gave me that nickname," he replied. So Sneaky he remained. Many months later, we learned that he got his nickname as a little boy from his uncanny ability to find packages of cookies that his grandmother had hidden from him in her kitchen. If there was a high-calorie food product anywhere in his vicinity, he was going to find and consume it. I started by addressing the collected teens and their parents. First off, thank you all for coming. There's a spot for everyone on the team if you commit to practicing and training hard. If you aren't interested in listening, learning, and giving your all, then I would invite you to save us all the time and leave now. 10 of the boys and 1 girl, Lisa Smith was her name and she was by far the best player to try out, decided to stick it out and our team was born. After some debate, the kids dubbed our team the Underdogs. Our team colors were a bright red and black, figuring that most kids in Georgia would have at least 1 jersey in each color. When it became apparent that some of the kids on the team were so poor that they didn't have jerseys of any color, the team picked up an anonymous sponsor to cover the costs of jerseys for everyone. And yes, that anonymous sponsor was my shop, but the kids didn't need to know that. Sneaky drew us a logo and we were in business. Practices were twice a week with an optional throwing session on Saturdays and games started in 2 weeks. The team was all over the place in terms of knowledge, skill, and talent. Sneaky could barely run 20 yards without gasping for breath while Lisa could run forever and was lightning fast. She would have been on a top team if she were a boy, or sadly if she was from a better family. Lisa often arrived at practice on a rickety old 1-speed with bald tires or occasionally was dropped off by what I hoped was an older brother or cousin, but who turned out to be an associate of her uncle, whose car was more rust than metal. Her and her 2 younger sisters lived with an uncle who had a place on the outskirts of town, while their father served out a sentence of 30 to life in the federal penitentiary in Atlanta. Her uncle had a well-earned reputation for hard living and there were rumors that he was involved in illegal ventures. The kids had nowhere else to live, though, so they did the best they could to survive, left almost entirely to their own devices. Lisa took out her frustrations with her home life on the boys that she played against. She was a beast on the field, with her sandy blonde ponytail swinging just out of reach of the boys that she easily evaded. She took full advantage of the referee's reluctance to call penalties on girls to take liberties that she otherwise would never have been allowed. At least a couple of times per game, the boys covering her would magically fall to the ground while she went off for a big play. She was a great kid and a real pleasure to coach. Our first game was a bit of a fiasco. In a stroke of bad luck, we were facing the defending champion Bulldogs, a team which featured the starting varsity quarterback and most of the varsity wide receivers from Jason's high school. While our team was still trying to learn how and where to line up, their team was throwing bombs to a trio of 6-foot-plus seniors destined for Division I college ball. 3 things happened that game, though, that gave me some hope. First, Jason's ability to read defenses and anticipate plays translated from practice to the field better than I could have hoped. He was consistently making throws to spaces where our players could make plays. If more of our players had run the proper routes or caught the ball when it hit their hands, we would have been in business. Second, Lisa was a football playing machine. At the start of the game, her defenders were playing soft and trying to chat her up. By the end of the game, they were silently sucking wind as she relentlessly punished them. She caught 2 of our 3 touchdowns, and it was awesome to watch. As hard as she was on the other team, though, she was harder on ours, constantly riding players who messed up plays or took plays off. There was no need for me to fire up the team when Lisa was a living, breathing flamethrower, and no one wanted to be the one to let her down. Third, it turned out that Sneaky had hands of Velcro. He might not look like much athletically, but once he started playing, he turned into a football-catching savant. If a football came anywhere near him, he would haul it in. Low, high, long, short, it didn't matter. Unfortunately, he was so badly winded by halftime that he couldn't do much with the ball once he made a catch. But he still managed to haul in our 3rd touchdown on a bullet from Jason to the left corner of the end zone, eliciting an exclamation of, "Nice," from the quarterback on the other team, and a fist bump from him as Jason left the field. We lost by nearly 50 points, but Jason couldn't stop grinning until long after I brought him home from the game. Jen came to every game and most of our practices. As the days grew longer and warmer, her shorts got shorter and tighter, and she often wore her blonde hair in a ponytail, which she threaded through the back of her ball cap. Her butt looked truly glorious in cut-off jean shorts, and her t-shirts did very little to hide her ample curves. Not that I was complaining, but some days it was hard to stay focused on the game. A few weeks into our season, Jen's new boyfriend Mike started to join her for some of the games, which, I can't lie, kind of sucked. It was one thing to hear that she had gone on a few dates over our Sunday dinners. It was quite another to see a tall, good-looking fellow roll up to our games in a late-model BMW and put his arm possessively around Jen on the sideline. Mike was a doctor and was all hair, teeth, and expensive clothes. His watch probably cost more than my truck. But he treated Jen well enough, and she seemed to like him back, so I couldn't complain. Sure, I was jealous and a little sad, but I knew she was out of my league from the start, and he could offer her things that I never could. Mike started taking Jen out for dinner after our games, leaving Jason and I to fend for ourselves. Win or lose, after each game we would head down to Shelley's Diner, a local institution that still offered old-style soda straight from the fountain and milkshakes large enough to guarantee you an ice cream headache before you were done. The back wall of the diner was lined with booths, featuring bright red and blue vinyl seats and linoleum tabletops. My dad used to bring me to Shelley's after my games and practices, so it was a pleasure to do the same for Jason. He loved the atmosphere and the old records in the jukebox in the corner, and Shelley, who still worked behind the counter even though she must be over 70, doted on him. After one game, we happened to pass Lisa walking home on our way to the diner. With Jason's blessing, I offered to give her a ride, and she ended up joining us at the diner that night, and many others before the season was over. I knew that neither Jason nor Lisa had money for the diner, so I made them a deal. Any game they made an outstanding play, dinner was on me. Miraculously, they were outstanding every game. As the spring progressed, the team started to gel. More and more of the players joined in on the optional weekend practices to the point that we had to move to an actual practice field to accommodate the numbers. Some of the kids started coming by the shop after school to throw the ball and lift weights with Jason as well. Sneaky came by just about every day, and after 6 weeks had dropped about 20 pounds of fat. He was starting to put on some real muscle as well to go with his natural size. Lisa, who was already the best athlete on the team, spent as much time as Sneaky working out and just generally giving the guys a hard time. Man, I loved those kids. Jason was focused on more than just football. He was still spending his free time in the shop, helping and learning from the other mechanics. In the beginning, he was a bit underfoot, but as he learned more, he started making a solid contribution, and the guys appreciated his help. He was a particular favorite of George, and Jason always made time to stop and help him with whatever project he was working on. Not many people had the patience to let George move at his own pace, but Jason always took as long as was needed and left George with a smile. I guess it was inevitable that Jason's curiosity would lead him to the Shelby. After my father passed, I didn't have the heart to do anything with the car, and it was still under a tarp in a corner of the yard. One Saturday, I came out to find Jason staring at it with the same analytical expression he got when assessing a football play. "JT, why do you have a beautiful car sitting under a tarp in your yard?" Being on the spectrum, Jason's questions were often blunt and to the point. "It was my dad's car, Jace," I replied, not really knowing where to begin. "When we got it, it was just a mess of bent steel and shattered fiberglass. He and I spent years working on it together to get it to where it is now. When he died, it was almost done, but I just didn't have the heart to keep working on it without him." "So why don't you sell it?" he asked. "I don't really know. He spent so many years working to bring its beauty back to life. It seemed wrong to let it go before it was done." Jason looked at me quietly for a minute. "I know what it's like to lose your dad. We're going to finish it together." To this day, I don't know if that last sentence was a question or a statement. Either way, I was overcome with emotion, and I answered, "Sure, buddy, I would really like that." That's how Jason and I ended up spending Sunday afternoons after church working together on the Shelby and sharing memories of my dad. End of June 2014. By the end of the school year, things were looking up for Jason. He had made some solid friends from the team who he would hang out with at school and over the summer. He still wasn't one of the in crowd, but having 1 or 2 good friends made all the difference. He still spent most of his time either gaming or in the shop with me, but increasingly one of his buddies would tag along or join us while we gamed. I didn't mind. His friends from the team felt like family to me, and I didn't even mind when Sneaky came over and put a significant dent in my snack supply. I swear that kid could smell potato chips from 50 feet away through 2 cupboards. We made progress on the Shelby as well. I had forgotten how close we were to being done with the restoration when my dad passed, and Jason showed a natural gift for the work. I had always been more a fly-by-the-seat-of-my-pants kind of guy, much to my dad's consternation. So Jason's orderly approach to the work was welcome. Once he understood my dad's plan, he executed it meticulously. Despite our progress, however, there was one part that we had yet to secure, the unique wood-inlaid steering wheel that they used on some of the original Shelby builds. My dad had been adamant that there was only one steering wheel that would go in his car, and that was it. Jason and I spent hours scouring wreckers and part shops for the wheel, but without any luck. But we forged ahead with the rest of the rebuild, confident that we would eventually find it. Jason also made slow but steady progress on his game. He learned to use his vision and footwork to maximize the impact of his preternatural throwing ability. That, combined with the dedication and perseverance of his teammates, led to a late-season winning streak for the underdogs and a berth in the league playoffs. That was the good news. The less-than-ideal news was that our opponents in the first round were the first team that we had played, featuring Jason's high school star quarterback, who were now undefeated on the season. On the day of the game, I found myself more nervous than I was 10 years earlier during my last high school playoff game. I was under no illusion that we would win, but I really wanted the team to do well, to show what they could do and that they belonged. I spent most of the day ill-tempered and distracted enough that eventually the guys in the shop suggested that I just go home until the game started. Jason, on the other hand, seemed to have no nerves at all. He spent the entire car ride to the game reciting receiver routes while outlining the next 10 steps in restoring the Shelby. His lack of concern began to rub off on me, and by the time we arrived at the game, I was smiling and laughing like usual. Jen arrived just before the game started, coming directly from work. I was a bit surprised that she was by herself. I saw no signs of Mike, but maybe he was just late. The first half of the game went well. On the very first play, Lisa broke the ankles of the boy that was covering her and ran uncontested into the end zone. Just before half, Jason gave the signal to Sneaky to go long, a very subtle two-finger gun. Jason lofted the ball into the deep left corner of the end zone, and Sneaky came down with it over 3 defenders. The score was tied at the half, and the team was stoked. The second half was a different story. The other team decided to really put on the clamps, and even Lisa had a hard time getting open once they stepped up their game. Sneaky was gassed and could barely make it up and down the field. We ended up losing by 3 touchdowns. After the game, Tom Miller, the varsity quarterback, made a point of coming over and shaking Jason's hand. "Great game, dude. Are you coming out for the team this year? I don't remember you from last year's tryouts, but we can always use a solid backup." Jason was floored, but managed to stammer out an affirmative before Tom was pulled away by his girlfriend Tabitha, a leggy brunette who was captain of the cheerleading squad. They seemed like good kids and took the time to congratulate the rest of the team as well before heading out to celebrate their victory. By this point, Jen had come over to join us, and I asked her if she was meeting Mike for dinner. "I don't think so," she answered in a sad voice that suggested that maybe all was not well with her and Mike. To cheer her up, I informed her that she would be joining us at Shelley's for a burger and soda instead. We dropped Jen's car off at the apartments, and we all rode in the truck. On the way, Jen admitted that she had never been to Shelley's but had heard all about it from Jason. I told her that she was in for a treat and that the sodas were on me. She smiled, and my heart sped into high gear as she flashed her dimples before turning to look out the window. God, Lisa's smiles made me feel some kind of way. Shelley's did not disappoint, but Jen's smile still seemed hollow, rarely touching her eyes. I handed Jason a $10 bill and suggested, "Why don't you go buy Lisa a milkshake to celebrate the end of an amazing season? The two of you can sit on the stools by the counter while I talk to your mom for a bit." Jason liked the idea a lot, and I waited until he and Lisa were out of hearing before I turned to Jen and asked, "Are you all right? You seem kind of down this evening." "I guess I am. It's just that Mike and I broke up. I thought he really liked me, but I guess not. Seems he was a bit of a nerd in high school, and he always dreamed about sleeping with a cheerleader. Well, he can check that off his list now, I guess." "Well, he's a complete idiot," I replied vehemently. "No, I get it. Now that he's a big success in life, he wants all those things he couldn't have when he was younger. I was just one of those things. Everybody loves the fantasy of sleeping with the unattainable cheerleader, but not the reality that the cheerleader is now a single mom who is drowning in debt. He broke up with me by text and couldn't even be bothered to do it face to face. I sometimes think I should just wear my old cheerleading uniform on my first dates and get it over with. If they are only there to see my, well, you know, why prolong the agony? I just really liked him, JT, and I thought he liked me too. I hoped that this time might be different." I'm sorry, Jen, I said, putting a sympathetic arm around her shoulders. You deserve so much more than that. You deserve the world. You are the smartest, kindest girl that I know, and anyone who can't see that is a complete idiot. Do I? Do I really deserve more? I am not so sure anymore. In high school, I wasn't some mean girl who made people's lives hell. But I could have been so much more than I was. Rather than helping make people's lives a bit better, I just hung out with the jocks and other cheerleaders. I see what a difference having friends is making in Jason's life. I could have done that so easily for so many kids, but I didn't. I was selfish, so maybe my life now is karma for the person I was back in high school. Before I could respond, Jason and Lisa had finished their milkshakes and wandered back to our table, and it was time to go. We dropped Lisa at her house and drove back to the apartments. Jen was quiet, and I could see her sadness reflected in the passenger window as Jason regaled us with the statistics he had tracked during the game.